Hello, my friends. How are you today? I'm sorry I'm just a bit late. I was trying to get some fabric organized so that we can play on sewing in slippers with Sue today. Today, we are going to play with making a brand new pattern, something that we could make quickly for Easter that we can cut with our rotary cutter. I love doing applique and I love teaching others how to make applique quilts. So one of the ways that I can bring new people in is making some simple patterns for applique that will be easy to make and very quick to make as well. So one of my thoughts was that I don't have an Easter quilt. And I have a lot of children in my life, and I thought it would be fun to make an Easter quilt for the kids. So we are just going to play today. I want to show you my process for how I come up with some designs. And that all starts with a bit of research and then a bit of drawing and some playing until we come up with something that will be fun to make. So behind me you see two quilts. And I could call these my Easter quilts. I just love the Tula Pink quilt with all of the spring flowers on it. So that quilt is called True Colors of Springtime. And our final session for making the True Colors of Springtime quilt happens this afternoon from 4 to 5 p.m. So if you've been making True Colors of Springtime with me this year, this is our final session. I've got my bottle of champagne and we are going to celebrate together. Then, if you're looking for your next project, we do have the cave clamshells coming up next. Now, I keep calling this quilt cave clamshells because that's what I named it when I made this pastel colored quilt, and that quilt is on the cover of my book, Hearts and More Rotary Cut Applique. So that's the actual quilt that I took to the beach and I photographed at the beach down in Westport, Massachusetts. So I just love this quilt, and I have since made it in the darker Kaffe Fassett fabrics. Well, you don't have to make this quilt out of Kaffe Fassett fabrics to make it beautiful. This is just one idea using all of the pastel kaffes. And on another session of Sewing in Slippers with Sue over the next couple of months, we'll be looking at this quilt and how it's made. We're going to be talking about different color choices, and I believe I'm going to use all of my, whoop, hold on just a sec. Okay. I believe I'm going to use all of my 30s fabrics that I've been collecting. So I've got this great collection of 30s fabrics, and I'm considering making my cave clamshell quilt with all of these fabrics. So I've already got them collected in a bin. About half of them are pressed with fusible. We're going to need 20 fat quarters for that quilt, and those 20 fat quarters we are going to be cutting into well, not the whole thing. I'm not going to get started with the instructions for that, but I know that I need to fuse some of that fabric. So I've already gotten my fabric fused and ready to go. So that is a quilt that's coming up, and we're not quite ready to start promoting that quilt yet because we don't have the product up on the website. But as soon as it's ready, I will let you know when you can register for the Cave Clamshell quilt. Now, you do not need to be a member of my Ahead of the Curve group in order to make that quilt with me. That is going to be one of our independent courses, and those courses are offered independently of the membership. The membership is where you take one class a month with me. You keep learning new skills one after the other. Every month you complete a project such as our Almost in Baltimore blocks. You can see a couple of them on my back wall. I've been working on this one in the beautiful So Batik fabrics, but these Almost in Baltimore blocks are our project. They're one of our projects for 2023. Other members are taking small project workshops. In April, we have an American flag coming up where we're going to make an American flag in a very easy way using rotary cut applique. So there's always projects or blocks, there's always choices of the different projects that you can make in Ahead of the Curve membership. Then of course we've got our courses, those are totally independent. And we have our fun times here on Tuesday mornings with Sewing in Slippers with Sue. Now today we are going to create together. We're really just going to play. I don't know exactly what we're going to make today, but I know it's going to be for Easter, and I know I want to make a baby quilt with this idea that I had. So I love to do little critters with my tools, the tools for rotary cutting your applique shapes. So today I printed out this little coloring page with peeps, and I thought that that was awfully cute and some really simple shapes that we could cut out with the Hearts and More tools, the Leaves Galore tools, to make up some little bunnies. And then I thought, what's more perfect to go with bunnies but some carrots. I think we need some carrots to grow in the ground so that our little bunnies can be pulling up those carrots. So one of my thoughts was to do a really simple block with just a bunny on it so that we could make that for a baby quilt. So let's tackle that block first. The first thing I like to do is to draw a square on my fabric, and it doesn't really matter what size square. We just want to get an idea of what size to make our bunny. So I'm just folding this 8.5 by 11 sheet of fabric so I can make like an 8-inch square, or I can go ahead and grab one of my quilter's squares. Let me do that. And I can actually draw a square on my fabric. Let's find my 1 and 1 on here. These rulers, they can be confusing, right? So we have to find the corner that says 1 and 1 to make my first side of that square. And today we're going to be drawing, and then we're going to be cutting. But the first thing I do when I'm designing a new pattern is I start to draw it out to see what I want to make and how big it needs to be. So now that I've drawn one corner of my square, how big can I get on this paper? Let's say an 8 by 8 square, okay? 8 by 8 roughly. Okay, so that's how big I'm drawing my square. And that would be a great size for a block for a children's quilt, because we could do 5 squares across. 5 squares across would be 40 inches, and we could do 7 squares down. So that would be, let's see, 5 times 8 is 40. 7 times 8 is what, 56? Yeah, 56. So that would be a nice size baby quilt if we did 5 by 7. So let's decide what we're going to do inside that square. Well, I had an idea that our little bunny could be kind of poking his head out from down below. So he can start down here, and we could draw a little 5-inch circle. Let's do that from E to E on our tool. I'm just going to draw that little 5-inch circle. And then we can have some nice long bunny ears coming up from there. So I'm going to use my 6-inch tool, and I'm just going to trace out some little bunny ears using my 6-inch tool. Now I'm going to be showing you this in just 1 minute, but I want to show you how easy it is to start this little design using our Leaves Galore tools and our Hearts and More tools, because those are the tools that make your basic designs, your basic shapes. So all we have here is a little circle for our bunny's face, and then some ears poking up. And that second ear, it's a little bit cockeyed, right? It's not quite straight up and down like the other one. And I was thinking of having this ear kind of coming down and maybe folded down a little bit so it looks like his ear is folded. So let's go ahead and try that. All right, so okay, now having his ears two different ways. Looks a little bit cuter because those ears were not straight up and down. So if I wanted to make a second block, I could make that bunny with his ears straight up and down. Now I like to put a little pink center on those ears. So I'm just going to use that same tool, the 6-inch tool, and I'm going to come in by about maybe a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to draw a little inner ear by using the tools to just follow those lines and make a little skinny inner ear for him. And I'll do the same thing in that ear that's folded over. So anytime I'm drawing with these tools, I know that I can create the shapes with these tools as well when I'm cutting my fabric. But now I just want to get an idea of what we're going to do. So we've just added a little inner ear so that we can use a little bit of pink fabric right there. And then we're going to need to find a face for our bunny. I can't even think in my imagination what that bunny face would look like. So let's do bunny cartoon drawings on Google. Let's just Google bunny cartoon drawings. Now this is where I get a lot of my inspiration are from coloring pages. So I'm going to just bring up, I'm going to share with you. Let's see if I can figure out how to do that. In my camera, I want to share my screen. Oh gosh, I'm always forgetting how to do this on this StreamYard. So hold on just a sec. I'm going to, let's see if I do present, we can share screen. That's the one, that's the one. And we're going to look at that Google search that I just did. Okay, good. So now we have some cute little bunny cartoon drawings. And we have some here with great big eyes. We've got a little tiny round nose. And look at that cute little bunny smile. Now I love that little shape because that shape right there of his top lip, I can certainly do that with the Leaves Galore tool, but we might want to keep it even more simple than that. Just some little eyes, tiny little nose, and a little cute little rounded face like that. And oh, I just love this one. He's got some little almond-shaped eyes, cute little triangle for a nose, and his face is kind of hidden down there. So these are where I would go for inspiration. So even this little, that little bunny with his eyes closed, isn't that adorable, the little bunny with his eyes closed? So we have all of these different ideas where we could use the different facial expressions and add that to our applique bunny. Now, one of the ways that we can add those facial expressions to our applique bunny would be to do it in applique. So let me stop that share and we'll get back to doing that. So if I used one of my small tools, I could do some little round eyes, and I'm not quite sure I want perfectly round eyes, but it's a good place to start. So I could draw some little 1-inch round eyes on my bunny, and then I can decide, do I want the bottom of those eyes to be round as well, or maybe I want to cut off just a little bit of that round eye and do something like this. So the two are different, but I'm just getting a thought. I'm just getting an idea together of how I could make that bunny a little bit unique and a little bit different instead of a perfectly round eye. Then maybe I'm going to use a little bit bigger circle to actually draw in his chubby little cheeks. So I'm going to use this little rounded circle, draw in these chubby little cheeks, and maybe at the bottom there, I'm just going to do a little rounded triangle for his nose. So I'm going to round the top of the triangle and just go straight down. And then I'll probably use an even bigger circle to make a cute little smile on my bunny. Now, these are just drawn lines right now, and these could certainly be quilted into my little bunny guy here. So here we go. Maybe some little whiskers. Okay, so here we go. We've got the start of our cute little bunny. So this is how I get started with making a pattern. Now that's awfully cute. I kind of like that all by itself. And my vision is to have a couple of bunnies just this way, straight on, looking right at the bunny. And then I could tilt that bunny. I could have the bunny coming from the corner of the block. And just those two bunnies would be absolutely adorable in a little baby quilt. So I think that this is a good start for our drawing. Do you think we're ready to go to fabric? Well, one more thing. We're going to need a carrot to go with our bunny. So how in the world am I going to make a carrot? I just need to be creative, right? So I know my carrots are going to be long and slim. So I'm going to draw a straight line that's long and slim, and I'm going to draw it angled out in both directions. So I'm actually just using my paper here to draw an angled line like that. And then I'm going to grab my little tiny Hearts and More tool. The little tiny Hearts and More tool, I'm going to snug down into that V until I can make a rounded top on my carrot with the large end of the tool. And then I'm going to come down here and do the small end of the tool with the rounded end down here. So I'm just going to snug this down until it fits. Oh, and I could have gone a lot wider on my carrot. But that's the idea, is just to have a rounded end on my carrot here, a rounded end on my carrot there, and then we're really just going to need some greens going up top. Now the greens can be really simple. I know I had a box here with some greens already cut. So let me just grab my scrap bag here, and I had a couple of green leaves from yesterday, and if I just put those on the very top of my carrot, I'll probably have to cut some more out of these scraps, but if I put those green leaves at the very top of my carrot, that's going to give me the indication that it's a carrot. I know that carrots don't have that type of green leaf. In fact, they're very ferny and fluffy, and they're not really solid leaves at all. But you know, we're drawing cartoons here, so we can just give an indication of some green leaves at the top of our carrot, and that will be adorable. So maybe some of my blocks are going to have the bunny, and some of the blocks are going to have the carrot. I think that that would work out well. Maybe a little bunch of carrots. Maybe a little bunch of carrots tied up with a ribbon. Wouldn't that be adorable to have 3 little carrots tied together with a ribbon? And if this is a baby quilt, maybe we should make that ribbon 3-dimensional. Maybe we should just stitch our ribbon up behind our carrots when we're doing our blanket stitch, and then let those be actually tied on the quilt. Wouldn't that be a great way to teach your kids how to tie their shoes? By tying those 3 little carrots together. I think that that would be a great addition to the quilt. And who knows, maybe someday this will really be a pattern. I don't often make simple patterns like this for a quilt, patterns that I sell, but I often will take an idea like this and bring it into the membership, where we work out a little baby quilt that you could make in one day, and that becomes a project for the membership. So whenever I have ideas like this, it might find its way into the membership, so that we can get some samples made, get the pattern done, and then eventually that might just become a pattern that's available on my website. So I just love this idea of my little bunny, the simple little carrot with just 3 little 2.5-inch leaves. They would be just perfect. But I'm also thinking that those leaves could be made just a little bit more delicate. Let's play with those leaves. So I'm going to actually angle my camera down a little bit more so that you can get a little bit better view of my cutting station. Oh, pulling it back works as well. So let's angle that camera down a little bit more. Oh, it doesn't want to stay. Sorry about that. All right, doesn't want to stay, but by moving that table back, I think that we've got what we need to on the screen. So when I am making those little leaves, generally I'm cutting those with my 2.5-inch tool to make a leaf that's 2.5-inch long. I think that's the perfect size for an 8-inch block. But I want to make those a little bit more delicate. So I'm going to turn to my 3-inch leaf tool. Now, how is a 3-inch leaf more delicate than a 2.5-inch leaf? Well, let me show you. I'm going to cut a series of leaves here, and I need my 28mm rotary cutter to do that. So we're going to cut a series of 3-inch leaves. That means we're going to cut one after the other using my Leaves Galore tool. Now, right now, I shouldn't be using my rotating mat because it's moving all over the place, but I am going to want my rotating mat in just a minute, so I'm just going to leave it right in place here and use that to cut out my bunny in just a minute. So I'm going to cut out that leaf shape, one after the other. Now, I'm only cutting through one layer of fabric right now. Generally, I cut 4 layers at a time, but I'm not ready to make this quilt yet, where I'm going to make lots and lots of these carrots. So I just want to test out this little theory that I have. So I'm going to take my leaves, and they're pretty solid. I want them a little bit more ferny. So I'm going to take those 3-inch leaves, and first of all, I could absolutely trim those down to be on that second dash line on the 3-inch tool. So if I trim them down to the second dash line, it goes from a 3-inch leaf to a 2.5-inch leaf. But that 2.5-inch leaf is thinner. It's finer than a 2.5-inch leaf cut with the 2.5-inch tool. Do you see the difference there? This one is skinnier, but it's the exact same length. This one's fatter, but it's the exact same length. They're both 2.5 inches. So that's the difference between cutting the 2.5-inch leaf with the petite tool and cutting the 2.5-inch leaf starting with a 3-inch leaf. Now, you might have a whole lot of 3-inch leaves left over from a different project. If you want a thinner leaf, just move right over to that second or even the third dash line, and you're going to be able to thin out your leaves. You're going to waste a little bit of fabric cutting off that little sliver, but that little sliver of fabric could also be used as a little offshoot for your vine. Let's put it right up there under the leaf, and you can see how we can utilize all those little pieces of, all those little pieces of fused fabric. So we can have our leaf, our vine, our fine leaves, and our fat leaves. So I had the thought that those leaves are a little chunky. So I'm going to take my 2.5-inch leaf because it's darker and I think it's going to show up better for you. And I'm going to fold that in half, and I'm just going to do a little fussy cutting. I'm going to snip into this leaf with the tip of my scissors and just make some little V-shaped cuts. And I'm not being fancy about this. I'm just making a few little V-shaped cuts on the fold. So I've got an open side. That's where I'm cutting from, is the open side. And I just wanted to cut into that leaf a little bit. Now that's a terrible example because I didn't really get my V's all the way down. But the idea is to not be fussy about this, but to cut some little V shapes out of the side of that leaf and make that leaf a little bit lighter, a little bit more delicate, a little bit of V shapes along that edge. And so that's just a thought. I'm not thrilled with the result right now, but today we're just playing. We're going to see what works and what doesn't work so we can incorporate some of these ideas into our latest quilt. Now, we might like that, we might not, but the idea is that we can take a shape, and we don't have to use the exact shape as is. We can alter that shape to make it thinner. We can alter that shape with our edges. Now, I just had another thought. I'm not too thrilled with those V shapes because I was pretty messy with making my V shapes. But what if I had a pair of pinking shears? What if I took that leaf shape and folded it in half, and then I re-trimmed the edge of that shape with a pair of pinking shears to give it a nice little serrated edge. Now there are lots of different leaves that have that serrated edge, so I think that that would be a really nice way to do some of our leaves for the tops of those carrots. Now, I don't know, I'm just playing here. It looks a little bit sloppy the way that I made my leaf, but I think the idea is valid. I think if I put a little bit of thought and time into that, I could make a little softer ferny edge leaf, and that might be a nice little addition for our carrot. But since we're sticking with not a realistic looking bunny, we're going to stick with this cartoonish bunny. I think the thin 3-inch leaves are the perfect choice for the tops of my carrots. So let's go ahead and actually start cutting these shapes out of some fabric. Now, when I finished my Tula quilt, I started it all over again. So I have so much of this leftover fabric after opening up 2 kits to make the Tula quilt. There's a lot of leftover fabric. And I went ahead and I grabbed a whole bunch of fabrics that I thought might make some nice backgrounds for a cute little Easter quilt. Of course, I think I want my bunnies to be white. So let's see what we can do about finding some fabric for our bunnies and for our backgrounds. So I'm just going to grab some of these green fabrics. I might want to make a little grass to put those bunnies in. And let's see, I'm only finding 1 or 2 greens here because I've got all my other colors from the Tula quilt. So let's pull out any greens that I find. Now these are not really, these are not fused yet, so that's okay. We're going to play around with some unfused fabric until we have our design just right. I hate to waste fabric and fusible, but I do like to really play with fabric, not only with paper. So I dug out some colors that I think would be appropriate for either the background of the bunny blocks, or we could do an alternating block, because I don't think I want a bunny in every single block. I'm probably going to alternate that with a solid block. So we have all these different prints here, these beautiful batiks and some prints that have some really interesting patterns to them. I really love this one because to me it looks like Easter because it's got the purples and greens and blues, but it also looks a bit like grass. So I'm going to pull that one out. Now I also found this fabric that I thought really looked Easterish, but after looking at it, it's a different type of a fabric. This is more like a Liberty of London fabric. So I'm going to put this one away and not use this one for this project, but it might find its way into my cave clamshell because it has the look of those 30s fabrics. So I think I'll join that together with my 30s fabrics and choose some other things for this Easter quilt. I love this fabric. That goes pretty well with this one, and that might make some nice alternating blocks. And then, of course, this fabric really makes me happy too. It reminds me of Easter eggs. So hey, maybe we could do some Easter eggs out of this fabric. So I'm going to put those fabrics aside, and I think I might make my bunnies out of this light gray. Kind of blends with the other ones, but it still is different enough that it stands out. Now I also have some orange fabrics that I think would be great for our carrots. So let me pull aside the orange fabric. And I've got some other batiks, some blues and purples and greens that might also work well into our blocks. So I really just rummaged through my stash and I pulled out anything that kind of screamed Easter to me. So let's look at all those different fabrics, and here's another one I thought I could use for my Easter eggs. So we're going to put those all here, and then we're going to make a pile for our bunnies. Now, I didn't want to make pure white bunnies, and I'll tell you why. If I cut out a circle of this fabric from my bunny's face, and I placed that on top of this darker fabric, which might be great for some grass for that bunny to be in, if I fuse my white fabric on top of my dark fabric, I might get some of that dark fabric showing through. So if I use a pure white fabric for my bunnies, I might have to line that fabric with another plain white fabric. Now, I do that sometimes when I'm doing a snowman or a bunny that I truly want to be white. You can line your fabric with a very inexpensive white, plain, solid white fabric. And I like to use a very inexpensive version. I might go to Joann's and buy the cheapest bleached muslin that I can find. Then I will fuse the back of the muslin. I'll fuse the front of the muslin, and I'll fuse that to my second piece of white, the one that I want to use on top. That gives you more weight and more opacity to your fabric. So you're going to have 2 layers of white fabric, 2 layers of fusible. Now that's definitely going to add to the weight of your quilt block. However, the Misty Fuse is pretty soft, and there are many times where I put one layer on top of the other. Say I'm making a flower. We have a flower and then a flower center. I often have 2 layers of applique, one on top of the other, so it doesn't really bother me to put 2 layers of fabric together with a layer of Misty Fuse in between. Then of course you need the Misty Fuse on the back as well. So we could do 2 layers of fabric, and then we can make a white bunny on top of that beautiful green field. And that's, honestly, I think that's what I want to do, because I really do like the idea of a white bunny for Easter instead of that gray colored bunny. I do like the gray as well. Maybe we'll do some gray bunnies and some white bunnies. That might be cute also. So let's put those together, and then you can give me your opinions. Do you like the gray bunny so that we don't have to line it and it will end up softer? Or do you like the white bunny? Is it worth lining it and give up a little bit of that softness in order to have a pure white bunny for Easter on that green background? Now we're going to take some time today. I usually don't do this, but I'm going to take some time today to actually get these pieces cut. I know that I want to make this bunny quilt, and I hate to just play and not actually get some work done. So today we're going to get some work done. I'm not just going to play. We're actually going to get this quilt started, which means I need to cut the backgrounds for my blocks. Now, I really love this fabric. In fact, I've been saving this fabric for something special. I really love it that much that I didn't want to use it for anything else. But a baby quilt, a charity quilt, that's a great place to use your favorite fabric. So I'm going to use it. There's always more fabric out there. I can go find another batik to replace this one. And some bunny is gonna love this quilt, pardon the pun. So let's go ahead and really get this started. Now my blocks, I was using an 8-inch square when I was designing my quilt. I love 8-inch squares because if you use the width of fabric, you can generally get 4 8-inch squares across the width of the fabric. And I think I've got enough fabric that I can make 2 rows of 8-inch squares across that width. And if it's not enough, I could probably scare up some other fabric along the way. But I might be changing my mind because I have more of the other pastel fabric over there. So I think I'm going to throw this aside and grab this other pastel fabric, which I think I've got more of that. So I hate to run out. I'm going to go ahead and use this larger piece. And let's go ahead and cut some 8-inch squares. Now, I think I'll cut them 8.5. That way they'll be 8 inches when finished. So I'm just going to square up the edge of my fabric here. Now, as I said, I generally wouldn't start this whole quilt with you, but you know, it's time well spent together, isn't it? So I think if you're working on a project, we can come and work here together on sewing in slippers. And I do have my slippers on, by the way, and actually get something done today. I belong to 2 different quilt guilds, and part of belonging to a quilt guild is participating in all of their different projects. Now, we have a couple of things going on in our quilt guild right now. First of all, we're making spring placemats that are going to Meals on Wheels. So our spring placemats will be delivered with the meals, and we will just brighten somebody's day with a cute little placemat under their meal, and those are for the Easter meals that are being delivered in a couple of weeks. So wouldn't a couple of, or a little bunny block in the center of a placemat look adorable? And we also have our ongoing community projects where we make quilts for anyone. We make quilts for kids, we make quilts for adults, we make quilts for anyone that's having a hard time. And anybody that knows somebody that's having a hard time can request a quilt, and we have a quilt stash. We basically have a stash of quilts that we can draw from when anybody needs some comfort. So again, let's find the 1 and 1. I'm going to find the 8.5-inch mark, and I've got my 8.5-inch mark marked here with glow line tape. This glow line tape is in the wrong place. No, that is at 8.5. Okay, so my 2 8.5 lines are marked with the glow line tape, and that just helps me to locate those lines a little faster and easier. If you don't know what the glow line tape is, it's just a roll of tape. It's 1/4 inch wide. It comes in 3 bright colors, so like neon colors, but they're clear, so that you can mark certain lines on your tool to make them easy to find. And that tape just comes off when you don't need it anymore. So I can remove any tape that I have on the tool. I can even move it around and use it more than once. But I love having that tape on my tool when I'm cutting a certain line over and over and over again, because it makes it very easy to find and very accurate. So there we go. We've got 2, 4, 6 squares at a time, and I can do that at least 1 more time, maybe 2. So that is going to get me either the alternating blocks or the bunny blocks out of this piece. So let me go ahead and cut another set of 8.5-inch squares. And I'm really going to be on my way to getting this quilt done, because 8.5-inch squares, they go together so quickly. I'll be able to put a quilt together in no time. Now, I don't like to do such basic, boring quilts for our comfort quilts. These people that want a little comfort in their life, they need something special. So some little child will just love a little bunny quilt with some carrots on it. So I'm not sure if these are going to be my alternating blocks or if these are going to be my bunny blocks. So let's start cutting our bunnies, and we'll see if it looks good on this fabric. Of course, the main part of our bunny is just a 5-inch circle. So I drew the 5-inch circle with the Hearts and More tool. I didn't need the full circle, but why not? It's easier to cut a full circle. So we can cut a full circle and just hang it off the side of the block. So I'm going to take my Hearts and More tool. I do need my rotating mat, and I'm going to grab some of those white fabrics. Now, I haven't fused this fabric yet. Again, I'm still playing, but I hate to waste my time. I know I'm going to need 5-inch circles. So let's go ahead and grab some fused fabric. Okay, I don't have any fabric fuse, so I'll demonstrate for you how we're going to line this fabric. So this fabric has a white on white print. It's something that I really do want to use. So I'm going to line that fabric with my plain white fabric. Now, I don't have a really inexpensive, lightweight, plain white fabric. So I'm just grabbing the only white fabric that I have, and that's a very common fabric that I have hanging around. It is the Kona white. And in order to put fusible on there, I'm going to need my applique pressing sheet. So let's line a piece of fabric so that if you end up using white fabrics for one of your projects, you'll get the idea of how this is done. So I'm going to take my Misty Fuse and I'm going to lay that on the back of that fabric. Let's spool out a little bit more so it's not so twisted. So I'll put that Misty Fuse on the back of my fabric. If I have any fusible sticking out the end, I'm going to trim that off. I don't want that fusible sticking to my applique pressing sheet where it's just going to get wasted and all gummy. So I'm going to cut it off and I'm going to save that little strip of fusible. That might be just enough for a carrot, but I also see a little bit of fusible here that's missing. So I'm going to cut a piece of that fusible and lay it right over the missing edge. I just had a little messy edge there. So now I've got fusible all the way to the edge. Grab my trash can there so I can throw away my little bits and pieces. And I'm going to put that fusible on the back of the plain white fabric. Okay, so this fabric is going to be my lining. So I just need to get that fusible onto the plain white fabric. Well, I don't think I heat that quite enough. When I'm not using my iron, it goes off, so it wasn't quite hot enough. So let's give that another little hot press here. Go a little slower so it actually has time to melt that Misty Fuse. Okay, so we've got the Misty Fuse on the white fabric, and now let's put it on the white on white. So this white on white fabric, I'm going to grab a little piece of that, and I'm going to fuse the two whites together. So I've got the Misty Fuse side up now on the plain white fabric, and I'm going to put it down on my white on white fabric. So now that layer of Misty Fuse is going to fuse these two fabrics together. So that's a simple process right there. Fuse my two fabrics together. Then I'm going to turn it over. Now this is the back side of my fabric. I've got my white on white that's going to show. Then I've got my lining fabric, and I'm going to put another piece of Misty Fuse on the back of that lining fabric. That's what's going to adhere my layers together. The one in between was just to adhere my two white fabrics together. So when I cut out my shapes from this white fabric, I need one more layer of Misty Fuse so that the applique pieces will adhere to the background. Okay, so let's get that fusible on the back of that fabric, and I am going to press it with my applique pressing sheet. Okay, oftentimes when I'm doing white fabric, I do use an applique pressing sheet. Earlier, just a minute ago, I ironed that white fabric without an applique pressing sheet, and I got a little bit of fusible residue or some dust on my fabric. So I don't know yet if it's fusible residue or dust. I think it's just dust from the bottom of my iron. So whenever you're doing white fabric, it's very prudent to make sure that the bottom of your iron is clean. If it's not clean, you're going to want to rub that off on a cleaning sheet. And the cleaning sheets that I use are the Bonash iron sheets. So these iron cleaning sheets will take that little bit of sticky residue off the bottom of your iron. It'll definitely get any lint or anything that's stuck to that residue off the bottom of your iron. And that would have been really smart to do before I started fusing. So in fact, it is just lint. I've just got little black specks on the front of my fabric. It's just lint, so I can just brush that away. So we're all good. Okay. That lint collects on the bottom of the iron though, because it was sticky from the fusible residue. So cleaning your iron frequently is a really good idea. Now I've got the fusible. I've got 2 layers of fusible, 2 layers of fabric. So it does have a little bit of a stiff hand. So be aware of that. If you're going to line your white fabrics, I really recommend you do it with the lightest weight cotton available. I used the Kona cotton, which is heavier. It's just what I had laying around my sewing room. But if I were going to actually use this in a quilt, I would go to Joann's and buy the cheapest muslin I can find. Now, once again, I keep putting my tools away. Once again, I need my rotating mat. So let me grab my rotating mat here to make it easier to cut those circles. And I think we probably need to get back to these peeps later too. So let's put that aside and we'll try to remember to get back to the peeps. So I'm going to cut out a whole bunch of my bunnies. So I'm going to fold my fabric half the width of the circle. So the circle that I'm making is 5 inches. So I'm going to fold up by at least 2.5 inches. And then using the rotating mat to my advantage here, I'm going to place the 90-degree markings on the fold of the fabric, and I'm going to cut out that first little circle. Oh, I need a nice sharp blade. So make sure that you've changed the blade in your 28mm rotary cutter, especially when you're going through multiple layers. And that's how easy it is to make a perfect 5-inch circle. Now, I'm going to have multiple 5-inch circles, so I have a bigger piece of fabric ready to go. But I also need some ears, don't I? So I'm going to grab my 6-inch tool, my 6-inch leaves galore. Here it is. And I'm going to cut out some 6-inch leaves. Now this fabric is not quite 12 inches, so I can't get to 6-inch leaves. I'm going to slim them down just a little bit. So I'm not going to cut a whole series of 6-inch leaves. I'm just going to cut out one at a time. So let me go ahead and cut this first leaf right here. Okay, I'm just cutting half of that 6-inch leaf. Now I'm going to spin that around. I can spin my mat around, and I actually want to go from H to H. I'm going to make it a little slimmer than I did in the drawing, and maybe that's too slim. Maybe I'm going to go halfway between the H and the I to make it just a little bit wider, but not a full 6-inch leaf. I just thought maybe a little smaller ear on my bunny might be a little bit more delicate. So let's go ahead and do that again. I'm going to cut, basically I'm going to cut a 6-inch leaf, or half of a 6-inch leaf here. Okay, I'm trying to conserve fabric because I didn't fuse quite enough fabric for this project, but that's all right. And I'm going to go halfway between H and I and create that second little ear. Now, how did we do? Are they the same? Oh my gosh, exactly. They're exactly the same because I'm using the markings on the tool to cut out these shapes. So let's stick to a very easy little bunny here. I'm going to grab my pressing surface. Let's see, grab my pressing surface. And I'm going to grab this background fabric, and I'm not 100% sure I'm going to use this as my background fabric. That might be the alternating block, but let's lay it out and see. So I can make my bunny poking his head up from the bottom of that block. So I don't want to see his whole head. I'm just going to leave part of the circle on that block, and then I'm going to look at putting his ears way up here. And look at that. I get the bunny, but I don't need the entire 6-inch leaf to make his ears. So I could have made shortened little leaves. I didn't have to cut a full 6-inch leaf, so I could have used a little bit less fabric that way. So there's the beginning of my bunny, and that looks awfully cute. But I also think I might want to make that one with his ear flopping down. So I'm going to make the same size ear shape. So I'm going to use the 6-inch tool. I'm going to cut half of the leaf shape. I'm going to go between H and I, cut the other half of the leaf shape, and then I want to make this ear flop down. So I'm going to put one over the other, flopping down like that, and then I want to cut the leaf that's underneath. I want this one to go right on top. I could leave that one underneath, but it's going to be a lot of weight, right? Because I've got 4 layers of fabric right there with the white fabric. So I think I'm going to cut it on this side. The way I'm going to cut it on that side is to mark that with my chalk. So I'm just going to go up here with the chalk, and I'm going to mark that curve here, and I can see the other curve under here. Now I know those curves are made with the 6-inch curve. Now I'm also going to mark the top of his head on this ear and the top of his head on that ear. Now I'm using yellow chalk. I don't recommend you use yellow chalk to make those markings. I would normally fill my chalk liner with iron erasable white chalk, and I sell that right on the website. But I'm using yellow chalk here so that you might just be able to catch that on the camera. Then I'm going to take that curve that I marked, and I'm going to cut that curve with my 6-inch tool, because that's the exact right curve that I need for that shape. So I'm going to cut that with the curve. I'm going to cut this one right here with that curve, and I'm actually cutting off that yellow line. So I'm going to tuck his ear back under. I cut 1/4 inch under the line for the ear. I'm going to tuck his ear back under just to that line. I'm going to tuck the yellow up under though, so that I don't see it. And then I'm going to take that piece that's going to go right up and over and make his little ear flopping down. Now I'm just going to overlap this part of the ear with this part of the ear by about 1/8 inch, just a little tiny bit. That 1/8 inch or 1/16 inch will be covered with our blanket stitching, so you won't even know that those two overlap. And I only have 1 thickness here and 1 thickness here of my 2 layers of fabric, instead of having this really overlapping and having 4 thicknesses of fabric right there. Now I'm going to trim this one up as well, and I'm just going to go about 1/4 inch under that yellow line and tuck that ear up under my bunny. Now everything's looking just a little bit chunky to me on that 8-inch square. Remember, we still need to have a seam allowance taken off of that square, so we want to make sure our pieces are pulled in far enough from the edges where we can sew this block into a quilt. So I think that's good. If we take 1/4 inch off there, we still have a good 1/2 inch before we hit his bunny ear. So this is the basic structure for our bunny block. Now what happens, and did I leave one of those bunny ears intact? I didn't. So let me grab one more bunny ear. What happens if we want to make that bunny with his ears going straight up and down? So let's go ahead and cut another bunny ear here. My 6-inch curve, going between the H and the I to make it just wide enough to match the other one. Okay, what if we wanted to make his bunny ears going straight up and down? We're just going to take off that floppy ear. We're going to add this ear that goes straight up and down, and I think we could have that bunny peeking out of the corner of the block. So let's go ahead and rotate that circle. Let's move it over to here to the corner. Let's put that bunny ears right here. And we can have our bunny poking out from the corner of the block, so when it's pieced in, it looks like this. And I think that would be an adorable addition to this quilt as well. Now, how am I going to make all the different little design elements for his face? I'm going to play with that. I might make little tiny strips of fabric in order to make the different facial elements. Now, I don't have, or maybe I do. I'm looking for a little pink fabric down here. Let's see what I've got handy. I'm just going to use this little pink fabric right here. Say I want to make that little bunny nose. I know I want to start with just a little circular piece, so I'm going to use my 1-inch circle because that nose is going to be pretty tiny. And then once I get a section with that little 1-inch circle, I'm going to fold that together and I'm going to clip down with my scissors. Of course, I could use a ruler to do this as well. Just make a little straight cut there. So I end up with a V on the bottom of that circle. So that, I think, is a great way to start for my little bunny nose. And then I'll probably use a little tiny straight line. Now, when you cut fused fabric, you have fusible on the back, whether it is 1 inch wide or whether it's a 1/16 of an inch wide. So we can cut a tiny little strip of fabric and it still has fusible on the back. So I can draw with those little strips of fabric. I'm going to draw down so I have that little line under his nose, and then I'm going to make a couple of little curvy pieces for his mouth. So I'm going to fold my fabric, and I could either use a Hearts and More tool or one of the small Leaves Galore curves. So I could use the 2.5-inch curve, but I think I'm going to go even smaller than that. I think I'm going to want to have this little 1 5/8-inch curve for the tops of his lips. So I'm going to just make one little curve with my tool. Okay, let's get that a nice clean cut. Oh, I'm missing a spot. I think I need to change my blade. Okay, let's get a new blade because we really do want a clean cut. Whenever I say I'm going to get a new blade, I just reach down and get a new rotary cutter. And sometimes that has a sharp blade and sometimes it doesn't. So we're going to have to see if I can find one with a sharper blade. Okay, so I've got a nice little cut right there. And then I'm going to just slide that tool up just a tiny little bit and make another cut. So it's about a 1/16 of an inch wide. And that one definitely isn't sharp. Okay, so I've got two little thin strips right there, and I'm going to use one piece over here and one piece over here. Now, that can be any length I want it to be. I'm probably going to trim that down a bit. Just take my scissors and just nip those down a little bit thinner. But I like the idea of using that little outline shape for the different features. Now, you don't have to. You can certainly do that just in your quilting. But doesn't that just add a little something when you use those tiny little shapes? Now, I often do this also if I'm going to make some whiskers. I might take that light gray fabric and just do some real thin little strips for the whiskers. Now, I don't have any gray fabric fused yet, but let's just look at it anyway. Let's see what it looks like so we can decide if the gray is the right fabric to do this with. I'm going to cut a little 1-inch strip wide of that gray fabric. Then I'm just going to cut a tiny little strip, less than 1/8 of an inch, probably about a 1/16 of an inch or even a 32nd of an inch. When you have fusible on the back of your fabric, you are able to cut just these little tiny strips. Now, this might be better just doing this with thread, but I just like the idea of giving an indication of his little whiskers here. And I think the gray thread would probably be better, but let's just give it a shot anyway. Kind of fun to play with. We get to decide, right? I don't know what I'm going to like and what I'm not going to like until I give it a try. If I decide I don't like it, no harm done, because I haven't even fused this fabric yet. I'm just playing around with it. If I decide I love it, then I can go ahead and fuse a little bit of this gray fabric and use that for his whiskers. They seem a little bit chunky to me, so I think I would rather just do these little design elements with some thread instead of with the fabric. So you get the idea of how I play with these different designs and just test out some different ideas. Are those ears too fat? Are they too thin? Do we want a little pink halo on the inside here? Do I want to do that with fabric, or do I want to do that with a little bit of paint? I'll probably stencil a little ear inside there so I don't have to add another layer of fabric and do any more weight. And I bet you could probably do that with a little bit of makeup. A little bit of blush on a brush would go nicely right inside that ear and give it just a little pink tinge. Now, I probably would use acrylic paint, a very dry brush technique. So my brush is almost dry with a tiny bit of acrylic paint on there. And just before I fuse any of these down, just shade the inside of that ear. And that would really give me that nice look without any added weight. So I think that's how I'll approach the ears, is by giving them a little bit of shadowing with that acrylic paint. Now, why acrylic paint? Because I can heat set that acrylic paint, becomes permanent, but I don't need to use another layer of fabric. I could do that on the cheeks as well. Put a little blush of pink on the cheeks, and this bunny would be absolutely adorable. Now, I haven't cut his eyes yet, and I certainly do need some eyes. So let that be our last step today. We're already past 12 o'clock, so I've taken a lot of your time, but let's do one last step and cut out some eyes. Now, it might be fun to use that same blue fabric that I'm using as the background for my block and add that little color to the eyes. But I have another little batik fabric here, and I think that this might be just what is called for his eyes. So I'm going to cut out two little eyes with this light blue fabric. It's not fused yet. I'm just going to get an idea if the color is right. If the color's right, then I'll go ahead and fuse a little bit of fabric. I don't mind wasting these little 1-inch circles. If the color's not right, then I haven't wasted the fusible as well. So let's cut out some little eyes. Now, I like what I did before. I cut out the 1-inch circle, but instead of just popping a 1-inch circle there, which looks really cartoony, really kind of bad, I'm going to then stack up those two circles and cut a little corner out of that little half circle using that same tool on the long side, on the large side. So I have some circles with some little half moons cut out. And then I think his eyes there are just a little cuter than doing that with a full circle. Now let me come up to the screen here so you can get an idea of what that's going to look like. Okay, so I've got the little eyes there. They're not quite right yet. They're a little bit different. I probably want to make a little cheek right here out of a different color to have his eyes going right up into his little cheeks there, or maybe just a little bit of that blush color. And I think that bunny is just about done. So sweet. I love making these cute little baby quilts. A baby quilt like this will go together faster to me than a pieced quilt, because I'm not going to do 8-inch blocks with piecing. So just by putting 3 little applique shapes on there, the 2 ears and the face, I can blanket stitch around those edges, and then more than likely I'll cut out his nose and his little lips. I think just the nose out of applique. Everything else I believe I will do with stitching. The whiskers, the little face, the little smile on his face, that little line between his lips, all of that I'm going to do with quilting and some colored thread. And even his eyes, I don't mind this, but I'll probably go in there and make a little pupil in that eye with my thread. And then a little white highlight, maybe a little white dot of paint is going to give that spark in the eyes of this little bunny. A little pink inside of his ears, and he will be done. So this project is probably going to be one day for me to put together this little bunny quilt. I don't know when I'm going to have a day to get him all together, but I really love this idea of making a very special quilt for those people that need a little comfort in their life. And this is the perfect little thing that you could do as a table runner, or even this little bunny poking out of the corner of a big placemat for that Meals on Wheels program. So I hope you'll have fun making a bunny for your quilt. I'm going to go finish up making some carrots, and then I'll probably alternate some of these blocks with the carrots so I can put that little ribbon tie idea on those carrots, and it will be a fun little activity quilt for those kids. So I hope you've had fun. Thank you. Someone says he's adorable. I hope you had fun making this little bunny quilt with me in a very simple and easy way. I will try to get at least 1 or 2 blocks done so that you can see the carrot block and the bunny block the next time we're on Sewing in Slippers with Sue. So come back every Tuesday and you'll see the progress that I make on my applique quilts. You'll learn some cool applique tips that you can use in your own quilts, like lining your white fabric when you're fusing white on top of another color. So until next time, it's Sue Pelland saying goodbye for Sewing in Slippers with Sue. Don't forget to like and share this episode if you would like to see more design tips with applique. Bye, everybody.